The Sheikh's house had always carried a kind of weight. It wasn't just the size of it, though the walls were tall and washed in desert gold. It was something else. A stillness. A presence. Walking through the courtyard felt like stepping into a place where time moved differently, slower, heavier. I was 23 and though I tried to hide it, I was restless. My father said I should come here, that Sheikh Omar would know what to say. He was older, not old exactly, late 30s maybe, but in our family his voice carried authority. People trusted him. They said his advice had a way of cutting straight to the heart. Still, I wasn't sure what I expected when I knocked at his door that evening. Guidance maybe. Reassurance. Some words to quiet the noise in my head about where my life was going. He opened the door himself. I hadn't seen him in over a year. I remembered him from weddings, from gatherings, always surrounded by people. But here alone he seemed taller. His robe fell in clean lines, his face shadowed by the fading sun. "Come in," he said warmly, and his voice carried a calm that I felt in my chest. The air inside was cool, carrying the faint smell of coffee and cardamom. We walked through to his study, a room lined with books and low lamps. He motioned for me to sit, and when I did, he lowered himself across from me, his movements unhurried, deliberate. He asked about my family, my work, my studies. His questions were simple, but his eyes never wandered. They stayed on me in a way that made it hard to pretend. Hard to give easy answers. When I admitted that I felt lost, that I didn't know what path I was supposed to take, he didn't immediately respond. He leaned back, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, studying me quietly. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged. I shifted, glancing away then back at him. He was still watching me, steady, calm, almost too calm. And something inside me stirred at the weight of that gaze. I told myself it was just the way he was, the authority he carried. But the truth was, I felt it in my body. The way my pulse picked up, the way my breath grew shallow, the way I couldn't look away for long. It wasn't just advice I wanted. Not in that moment. Finally he spoke, his voice low, measured. "You came for guidance. But maybe, guidance isn't the only thing you're searching for." The words hung there between us. I didn't know what he meant, not exactly. But the way he said it, the way he looked at me as he said it, made me feel like he had seen something I hadn't dared to name. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The air seemed to thicken. My palms were damp, though the room was cool. I thought of standing, of making an excuse, of breaking the silence. But I didn't. I sat there, caught in his gaze, feeling like the night had already shifted, like nothing after this moment would be quite the same. He insisted I stay for dinner. I tried to decline at first, out of politeness, out of nerves, but he brushed it aside with that calm certainty of his. "You'll eat here," he said simply, as if it wasn't a question. And so I stayed. The meal was simple: bread, lamb, olives, a pot of steaming tea between us. We sat cross-legged on the floor, the lantern light flickering against the walls. It should have felt ordinary, but it didn't. Every move felt heightened. His hands tearing bread, the way his sleeves slipped back just enough to show his wrist, the curve of his mouth as he tasted the food. I kept telling myself not to notice, not to pay attention. But I did. I noticed everything. At one point, as I reached for the teapot, his hand moved at the same time. Our fingers brushed just for a second. It was nothing, an accident. But it sent a rush of heat straight to my chest. I pulled back too quickly, spilling a few drops on the rug. "Careful," he said, not scolding, just amused. His lips tugged into the faintest smile. I forced a laugh, mumbling an apology, but my hands betrayed me. They shook as I set the pot down. He saw it. I knew he did. After dinner, he suggested we sit in the smaller lounge where the air was cooler. He brought a blanket and draped it across the sofa before lowering himself beside me. I thought he'd sit at the far end, but he didn't. He sat close. Closer than necessary. His shoulder brushed mine as he settled back against the cushions. My body went still. I could feel the warmth of him through the fabric of my shirt. My mind screamed at me to shift, to lean away, to reclaim space, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It hummed, thick with awareness. I could hear his breathing, steady and slow, and the faint rasp of fabric as he adjusted his arm against the sofa's back. I stared at the floor, pretending to be calm. But my eyes betrayed me, sliding sideways, catching glimpses of him. The way his chest rose and fell. The way his hand rested on the cushion between us, relaxed, open, only inches from mine. Too close to be nothing, I thought. Too close to pretend. I curled my fingers against my palm, fighting the urge to reach across that small, impossible gap. I didn't. But the thought alone was enough to set my pulse racing. When I finally looked up, I found his eyes on me again. They weren't questioning. They weren't pushing. They were simply there, steady and unflinching, as if he could read every thought in my head. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, to say something safe. But the words never came. And in that silence, I knew, whether or not we acknowledged it, something had shifted. Something real. I sat perfectly still, not daring to move closer, not daring to move away. Trapped in the gravity of it. A moment too fragile, too electric to risk breaking. The silence between us should have been unbearable. It should have pushed me to say something, anything, to fill the space. But it didn't. It settled around us like a blanket, heavy, charged, almost alive. He hadn't moved his hand from the cushion. I hadn't moved mine either. The inches between us felt smaller with every passing moment. Finally, he broke the quiet. His voice was low, steady. "What is it you're afraid of?" The question caught me off guard. My head turned sharply toward him. His eyes met mine, unwavering, patient, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for my answer. My lips parted, but no words came. What was I afraid of? Disappointing my family? Choosing the wrong path? The thing growing in this room between us? All of it, tangled together in a knot I couldn't untie. I swallowed, my chest tight. "I don't know," I whispered, and even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. He leaned back slightly, studying me in that quiet, unshakable way of his. "You carry too much," he said softly. "You think you need to have everything figured out all at once. But sometimes," he paused, his eyes never leaving mine, "sometimes it's in not knowing that the truth begins to show itself." Something inside me cracked at his words. Maybe it was the gentleness in his tone, or the way he said it, as if he truly saw me. For the first time in months, I felt the urge to stop hiding, to let something real spill out. "I feel like I'm living half a life," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Like I'm holding something back. Like I'm scared of what will happen if I stop pretending." The words came out raw, and once they were spoken, I couldn't take them back. The silence that followed was different now. Not empty, not heavy, but open, like a wound exposed to the air. He didn't rush to respond. He didn't offer easy answers. He just looked at me, really looked, until I felt both terrified and strangely safe. Finally he reached forward. Not toward my hand, not toward my shoulder. Toward the lamp. He turned the flame down low until the room was cast in deep shadow, the corners fading into darkness. His face was harder to read now, but his eyes still caught the faint light. When he spoke again, it was almost a whisper. "You don't have to be afraid here." The words hit me like a blow. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just sat there, my heart pounding, the silence pressing closer and closer until it felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Something had changed. We both knew it. Even without touching, without saying more, it was there, alive in the space between us. And in that silence I realized, sometimes what isn't spoken says more than words ever could. I don't know how long we sat there after his words. Minutes, hours. Time had started to stretch strangely inside those walls, bending itself around silences that carried more weight than whole conversations. At some point he shifted. Just a small movement, leaning back against the sofa cushions, his arm draped loosely along the backrest. The gesture was casual, ordinary, except it wasn't. His hand was suddenly behind me, close enough that if I leaned back just a little more, I'd be within his reach. I told myself not to think about it, not to notice. But every part of me noticed. My shoulders stiffened, my breathing shallow. I kept my eyes on the floor, but my awareness narrowed to one thing only, the nearness of his arm. And then, slowly, inevitably, his hand moved. It came to rest on my shoulder. Lightly. Not firm, not demanding, just a quiet, steady weight like an anchor laid gently in place. My entire body went still. I could feel the warmth of his palm through the thin fabric of my shirt. The heat of it spread, sinking deeper than skin. My first instinct was to pull away, to laugh it off, to undo the moment before it could mean anything. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I sat frozen, listening to the quickening of my own pulse. He didn't move either. His hand stayed there, patient, unhurried. His thumb shifted once, almost absently, a small stroke across my shoulder blade, as if testing how much I'd allow. The breath caught in my throat. I wanted to turn my head, to meet his eyes, to see if what I felt was reflected there. But I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd find. Afraid of confirming what I already knew. When I finally dared a glance, he was looking at me. Not with intensity this time, not with command. With something quieter. Softer. His gaze was steady, but his eyes were gentler than I'd ever seen them. It was too much. Too honest. I stood abruptly, breaking the contact. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped away from the sofa. Maybe I should go, I blurted, my voice rough. He didn't move right away. He sat still, watching me, his expression unreadable. When he finally rose, his movements were unhurried, composed. His eyes found mine again and I felt pinned to the spot. "You can," he said softly. "But you don't have to." The word stopped me cold. He wasn't asking me to stay. He wasn't asking me to go. He was giving me the choice, placing it entirely in my hands. For a long moment I just stood there, torn between the urge to flee and the ache to remain. I didn't walk out. But I didn't move closer either. I hovered in that space between, my chest heavy with the echo of his touch, the touch that stayed even after it was gone. And in that fragile pause, I realized something terrifying and undeniable. A seed had been planted. Something had begun, whether we admitted it or not. I didn't leave. I thought I would, after I said those words. But somehow I found myself still inside his house when the desert night deepened, when the wind rose outside, scattering sand against the walls like soft drumming. He offered me the guest room and I accepted. My chest was too tight, my thoughts too restless for me to imagine the road back home. But lying in that bed I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind, to the faint creaks of the house, to my own breathing that refused to steady. The memory of his hand on my shoulder burned through the dark. Sometime past midnight, a soft knock came at my door. I froze, my heart lurching. "Yes." I managed, my voice hoarse. He opened the door gently, leaning in, the glow of a lantern haloing him in pale light. He wasn't dressed formally now, just a robe loose, his hair slightly mussed as if he too hadn't found rest. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head, my throat dry. He motioned for me to follow. We padded quietly through the halls until we stepped into the courtyard. The wind had calmed by then, leaving the air cool and still. Above us, the desert sky stretched wide and endless, thick with stars. We sat on the stone steps, side by side. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Not suffocating, expectant. After a long while he spoke. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "You're carrying something," he said. "And it's not just questions about your future." The words cut straight through me. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping my knees. I wanted to deny it, to laugh, to push it away. But I couldn't. Not here, not with him. "It doesn't feel like nothing," I whispered, almost to myself. The moment I said it, my heart hammered in panic. But when I glanced at him, his face was turned fully toward me, his eyes catching the starlight. And for the first time his composure cracked. Just slightly. Enough for me to see the truth mirrored back at me. He didn't speak right away. His hand lifted, hesitated in the air for a breath, and then, so slowly, so carefully, he touched the side of my face. His fingertips brushed my cheek, feather-light, as though he was afraid I'd vanish if he pressed harder. My eyes closed, unbidden, my body leaning into that touch as though it had been waiting all along. I felt my breath shake, heard it catch in my own throat. The world seemed to narrow to that one point of contact. The warmth of his skin against mine, the steady calm of his presence. He let his hand linger, not rushed, not demanding. And then, after what felt like forever, he withdrew. The air cooled in the space he left behind. "Then maybe it isn't," he said quietly. The silence that followed was full of everything we hadn't said, everything we couldn't name. We didn't move closer. We didn't kiss. We just sat under the desert sky, the stars burning bright and indifferent above us, while the question between us remained alive, undeniable. What if this is real? The morning light was thin when I woke, pale gold spilling through the guest room shutters. For a moment I lay there, unsure if the night before had been real. My mind replayed the courtyard, the stars, his hand against my cheek. It felt like something out of a dream, too delicate, too impossible to exist in the daylight. But when I stepped into the kitchen, there he was. Omar stood at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 cups. His robe was tied loosely at the waist, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked softer, somehow stripped of the weight he usually carried. When he glanced up and saw me, he smiled, small, almost shy. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I answered, my voice catching despite myself. We sat at the table, the coffee steaming between us. At first we spoke of nothing, the weather, the sound of the wind in the night, the quietness of the desert. But underneath it there was something new. The silence didn't push us apart anymore, it held us together. Later, back in the study, the sunlight slanted through the windows, dust motes drifting lazily in the golden air. We talked for hours, about my childhood, his travels, the things that made us feel alive. I heard myself telling stories I hadn't thought of in years, stories I didn't know I still carried. He listened with the same focus as always, but there was something gentler now, something open. At one point I laughed at myself, shaking my head. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Because you need to, he said simply. And he was right. I did need to. I needed the way he listened, the way he made me feel like my words weren't foolish or heavy, but worth hearing. A lull came. The quiet stretched, but this time I welcomed it. Our knees brushed where we sat, and neither of us moved away. The touch was so small, but it rooted me in place like proof that this wasn't imagined. Slowly, almost hesitantly, his hand moved. It found mine not all at once but in a slow, deliberate brush, his fingers grazing mine, waiting, offering. My breath caught. And then I let my own fingers curl around his, the smallest act of surrender. The world fell away. We sat like that, hand in hand, saying nothing. The weight of the gesture was more than words could ever carry. My chest ached with something I couldn't name, something vast, frightening, but also right. At some point he leaned closer, not to claim, not to command, but to simply be there. I felt his breath near my temple before the softest touch followed, a kiss so gentle it might have been mistaken for a brush of air. I closed my eyes. I didn't pull away. I leaned into it, letting the warmth sink into me. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't rushed. It was fragile, careful, like a truth too sacred to speak aloud. When he drew back, I opened my eyes to find him watching me, not with certainty, not with answers, but with something I recognized only because I felt it too, a quiet awe. And in that moment I realized, I had been waiting for this. Maybe all along. I woke before dawn. The guest room was bathed in the faintest glow, the sky outside still gray, the desert just beginning to breathe with morning. I lay there for a moment, listening to the stillness of the house. It was the kind of silence that followed a storm, not empty but full. Full of what had shifted, of what couldn't be taken back. I thought about leaving quietly, slipping away before words could complicate what last night had made simple. But I didn't. Something in me wanted to see him again in the light of day. To know if it had been real. When I stepped into the kitchen he was already there. He stood at the stove, brewing coffee, his robe tied neatly this time, his movements unhurried. The soft light from the small window caught his profile, outlining the lines of his face. He turned when he heard me, and the smallest smile appeared, warm, steady, like he'd been waiting. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I echoed, softer than I meant to. He poured 2 cups, setting one in front of me at the table. The steam curled between us. We sat there, sipping in silence. It should have been ordinary, just 2 men sharing coffee, but it wasn't. Not after last night. At one point, his hand brushed mine as he passed the bread. He didn't move it away this time. Our fingers lingered together, curled into each other naturally, without thought. No words accompanied the gesture, and none were needed. The silence felt different now, not heavy, not questioning. It felt like a place we could rest. I wanted to ask what it meant. I wanted to demand clarity, a definition, something to hold on to. But I didn't. Because I realized words might only cheapen what was already clear in its own quiet way. After breakfast I packed my small bag. He walked me to the door. The desert morning had turned bright, the sky stretching endless and blue. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sand and stone. I hesitated at the threshold, my bag slung over my shoulder, my chest heavy with everything unsaid. I wanted to thank him, but the word felt too small. I wanted to tell him I was afraid, but that felt too fragile. In the end I only managed one thing. "Thank you," I said quietly. His eyes softened. He placed his hand briefly on my chest, over my heart. The warmth of his palm seeped into me, steady, grounding. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just don't run from what you've found." The words landed like an anchor. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. For a moment neither of us moved. The desert wind lifted, brushing between us, carrying the silence like a thread that tied us together. And then, slowly, I turned and stepped out into the light. As I walked away, I kept my eyes on the horizon, on the wide expanse stretching out before me. Something in me had shifted. I hadn't come for this, I hadn't even known it was possible. But now, after one night in that house, nothing looked the same. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But I knew, with a certainty that startled me, that I wouldn't undo it for anything. Whatever this becomes, whether it grows, whether it stays hidden, whether it remains only a memory, it has already changed me. And for the first time in a long time I felt ready. Ready to face my life, ready to face myself. ready for whatever might come next.